Hare Krishna, welcome everyone. Good to see you all. Tonight we are continuing with our study of the Bhakti Shastri course, and tonight we will continue with our study of Nectar of Devotion. We're in the Sadhana Bhakti section, and tonight we'll cover chapter 16. And chapter 16 is the second chapter discussing Rag Anuga Bhakti, which is a type of sadhana, as we explained last week. Sadhana Bhakti has two divisions. There is Vaiti Sadhana Bhakti and Rag Anuga Sadhana Bhakti. So Vaiti refers to rules and regulations. And sadhana means practice. Bhakti means devotion. So the devotion of practice, which is governed by rules and regulations. And as we discussed last week, it is somewhat fear-based because the reason people follow Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti is because they think, well, if I follow it, I'll get reactions and or I'll disappoint my spiritual master, or I'll disobey my spiritual master. You know, and there's different motivations for following, which is good. I mean, the point is, at least you are following. At least you're practicing bhakti. You're practicing sadhana bhakti, which is very good. But it's based upon awe and reverence. And in the beginning in ISKCON, we are practicing something of a mix from the very beginning of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti. In the sense that Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti means we are following rules and regulations, which is something we do in the beginning of ISKCON. And it is based on maybe fear or awe and reverence. But as we develop in our bhakti, and if we develop the desire to follow in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan and become attracted to the residents of Vrindavan and become attracted to their mood of devotional service, then we can then begin to transition more into the practice of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, which means we begin to cultivate the mood of not just worshipping Krishna, Radha Krishna, or Gaurnitai, or Jagannath Balaram Subhadra with the mood of awe and reverence, but we begin to worship them with some mood of spontaneity and cultivate the mood of being free from awe and reverence, and just trying to cultivate the mood of serving Krishna in one of the rasas which is found in Vrindavan, such as Madhurya Ras, Vatsalya Ras, and Sakya Ras. So as we go forward in our devotional service, we'll begin to develop a more spontaneous mood. And we begin to covet, because as we mentioned last week, Raganuga Bhakti is based on lopa, or greed. So by hearing from the Srimad Bhagavatam and scriptures following in the pursuance of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and by associating with advanced devotees who are in the mood of serving Krishna, following in the footsteps of the Brijbasis, then we will begin to develop lopa, or greed, to develop a similar mood in bhakti, and that's called Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, following in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan. So tonight we'll begin chapter 16, which is the second chapter. Now, in this chapter, Rupa Goswami will speak 3 verses which delineate or explain the process of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. And it's very interesting. This has been pointed out by different commentators and different acharyas, that he only gives 3 verses on this topic of how to actually practice Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, which means it leaves a lot of room for expansion on the topic. And Rupa Goswami and others, they expand the topic. They expand about the process of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. There are acharyas who have followed Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and others who have expanded upon the topic, which was first described in seed-like form by Rupa Goswami. So we'll begin chapter 16. If you have any questions or comments as we go, then please ask. So this chapter continues Srila Rupa Goswami's and spontaneous devotional service. As mentioned, the spontaneous love found in the residents of Vrindavan has two divisions: Kama Rupa, sensual attraction, and Sambandha Rupa, relationship. Chapter 15 ended the analysis of Kama Rupa. Chapter 16 begins with the brief analysis of Sambandha Rupa. So this was discussed last week, that Kama Rupa means to follow in the footsteps of the gopis or the devotees who have a mood of conjugal attraction towards Krishna. Kam means lust, desire, and to follow specifically in the mood of the gopis, for example, of Vrindavan, that is called Kama Rupa Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. Now, the other type of sadhana, Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti is called Sambandha Rupa. Sambandha means relationship, and that is Vatsalya Ras and Sakya Ras. And even, we could say Shanta Ras and Dasya Ras in Vrindavan. When the devotees have this mood of Vatsalya, it's relationship, Krishna is our son, or Sakya, which means relationship, Krishna is our friend, or Dasya, relationship, Krishna is our master. So this is the other type of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. It is called Sambandha Rupa. So just as Kama Rupa is the intense attachment to service in the mood of a lover, Sambandha Rupa is the intense attachment to service in the mood of a parent, friend, or servant. Kama Rupa and Sambandha Rupa describe the eternal residents of Vrindavan, who possess spontaneous devotion. The primary subject of chapters 15 and 16, however, is the practice of spontaneous devotion, Raganuga Sadhana, not the perfection of spontaneous devotion, Ragatmika Prema. Therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami presents the subject of Ragatmika Bhakti only briefly. Srila Prabhupada writes, in the stage of devotional service, where regulative principles are followed, there is no necessity of discussing this love, for it must develop of itself in a more advanced stage. So actually the next section of the Nectar of Devotion, because tonight we're covering chapter 16, Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. And then the final three chapters of this section of the Eastern division of the Nectar of Devotion, the Bhakti-rasmrta-sindhu, the eastern side of the ocean, they discuss, the next three chapters discuss Bhava and Prema Bhakti. Then, when we go to the southern side of the ocean, which is chapter 20 onwards, we begin to hear about these topics of Prema being unpacked, or love for Krishna, Prema Bhakti being unpacked. And then we hear about Ragatmika Bhakti, the love of the actual eternal associates of Krishna, his Nitya Parikas. So that's what is not being discussed here. Prabhupada's pointing that out. We're not yet going to that. That will come in the next section. Spontaneous devotional service, Raganuga Bhakti, is the practice of advanced devotees, intended to cultivate the sentiments of a particular eternal devotee, Ragatmika Bhakti, Ragatmika Bhakta. Before revealing the methods of this practice, Srila Rupa Goswami first describes the prerequisites a practitioner must possess. So we need to understand what are the qualifications that we need to practice Raganuga Bhakti. As Prabhupada says, this is advanced devotional service. It actually really, I mean, Raganuga Bhakti can begin from the day you walk in the temple. You know, you have some spontaneous attraction to Krishna. I think we all have a little bit of that. But it really begins, the practice really begins at the stage of Nishta and beyond. Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, and Prema. It really begins when you get to the platform of Nishta. Nishta means when you are steady in bhakti. Nishta comes after Anatta Nivritti. Anatta Nivritti means getting rid of the unwanted habits, the unwanted attachments that we have in our service to Krishna. All of us have these unwanted material desires. When you get around, Prabhupada explains, around about 70% rid of these unwanted material desires, you become steady, you become fixed in bhakti. And that's when you can begin to cultivate Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti properly. And then that will lead you to Ruchi, to Asakti, and to Bhava. And then eventually to Prema. The basic qualification of Raganuga Bhakti is a natural spontaneous desire to serve Krishna in a specific relationship. A desire that can be evoked by hearing about the eternal residence of Vrindavan. The Nectar of Devotion describes this in a way. The development of the ambition to become like a particular devotee. And this activity is called Rag Anuga. So when we feel this spontaneous attraction becoming evoked, as we said, where does this come from? This lobha, this greed, this intense desire, the interest to follow in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan. It comes from hearing about them from the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10th canto specifically. It comes from hearing the books of the Goswamis, which are in pursuance of the descriptions in the 10th canto, like Ananda Vrindavan Champu and Gopal Champu and these different books. And it comes when we associate with devotees who have this lobha or this greed. And there are many advanced devotees in ISKCON who have this lobha or this greed, this spontaneous attraction and attachment to Krishna in the mood of the residents of Vrindavan. So by associating with those devotees, we will also feel like that. We will feel that kind of attraction and attachment manifesting. Srila Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita describes this verse of Bhakti-rasmrta-sindhu more elaborately. Tatad bhavadi madhurye shrute dir yad apekshate natra shastram nayuktim cha tal lopot pati lakshanam. This is from Madhya Lila, chapter 22, verse 155 of Chaitanya Charitamrita. When an advanced devotee, when an advanced realized devotee hears about the affairs of the devotees of Vrindavan in the mellows of Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya, he becomes inclined in that way, and his intelligence becomes attracted. Indeed, he begins to covet that particular type of devotion. When such covetousness is awakened, One's intelligence no longer depends on the instructions of Shastra, revealed scripture, logic, or argument. So it is the process of hearing, Shravanam, from advanced devotees and advanced Shastras that allows us to develop Rag Anuga Bhakti, to cultivate Rag Anuga Bhakti. So that means we have to hear Bhagavatam, Krishna book, and these other books following in the pursuance of the Vedic version. And this will help us, and to associate with those devotees, hear from those devotees who speak about these topics, and that will elevate our consciousness. The devotional service of a Raganuga devotee is guided only by his intense craving to attain the service of a particular resident of Vrindavan, not by scriptural injunction. Srila Prabhupada describes, these Raganuga devotees do not follow the regulative principles of devotional service very strictly, but by spontaneous nature become attracted to some of the eternal devotees such as Nanda and Yashoda, and they try to follow in their footsteps spontaneously. So you hear about these devotees, and then you try to follow their mood. You try to learn the mood in which they serve Krishna. You meditate on that mood while chanting your japa. You read about their mood in Krishna book and other places, and you meditate on that mood while doing your service. And in this way, you begin to develop a spontaneous attraction, following in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan. One point must be repeatedly stressed, that a Raganuga devotee is above the regulative principles, means that they are not dependent on scriptural injunction for their inspiration to serve and surrender. Their inspiration comes from their own spontaneous affection. This does not mean that a Raganuga Bhakta does not follow the regulative principles. It means that their motivation is love, raga, not obligation, vidhi. It's a very important point, because sometimes it's misunderstood that when one gets to the platform of Raganuga Bhakti, one gives up the rules and regulations. One might say, I don't have to chant my rounds, or I don't have to bow down when I come into the temple and see the deity, or I don't have to offer my food to the deity, or I don't have to practice certain rules and regulations. No, it means you will still practice those things, but your mood will be different while you're doing it. In other words, while you're chanting the Maha Mantra, you will be meditating on the eternal resonance of Vrindavan. So you're still chanting around, still following the regulative principles, still doing all of the rules and regulations of bhakti, but your mood has changed. When you offer the arti, you won't just be counting 4, 2, 3, 7, but you'll be meditating on the mood that the eternal residents of Vrindavan offer their service to Krishna in. And you'll be meditating on that while offering the arti to Krishna, for example. That's when we cultivate Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. So I hope this makes sense. The basic qualification for Raganuga Bhakti is eagerness, lopa, to achieve the service of a particular Ragatmika devotee. But this eagerness is not cheap or easy to come by. Lopa, intense covetousness, refers to the state where our sole and overwhelming desire is to please Krishna in a particular way. As long as there is some other desire in our hearts, the required intensity of focus cannot manifest. So lopa is that intense desire to follow a particular devotee in Vrindavan. And when that becomes your overwhelming desire in your consciousness, that's when you're practicing Raganuga Bhakti properly. You know, we all have other desires, you know, but when we focus on that as being our main desire in our heart, in our consciousness, that I want to become an eternal servant of Radha and Krishna. You know, when you begin to meditate like that in your bhakti, then that's when Raganuga Bhakti is really being practiced properly. Therefore, lopa usually does not awaken until the devotee achieves steadiness at the completion of anatta nivritti. After having thoroughly heard Srimad Bhagavatam and being freed from all unwanted desires, one then possesses the qualification to practice genuine Raganuga Bhakti. So it's a nice point which is being made here. We have to become steady. We have to become at least 70% free of material desires. And we have to have thoroughly heard the Bhagavatam, which means we have to hear the Bhagavatam regularly and from advanced devotees. And by doing this, then we also practice Raganuga Bhakti properly. Srila Prabhupada states on page 126, we must always remember, however, that such eagerness to follow in the footsteps of the denizens of Braj, Vrindavan, is not possible unless one is freed from material contamination. He defines freedom from material contamination as follows. There is a stage called anatta nivritti, which means the disappearance of all material contamination. So you can't really follow Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti steadily and properly until you become free sufficiently from material contamination. Doesn't mean that all the material desires are gone, but it means you're not acting on them and you've overcome a great deal of them. They're not disturbing you so much. Upon completing anatta nivritti, we become qualified to practice Raganuga Bhakti. Anatta nivritti occurs in the stage of sadhana, before bhava or prema. We must therefore conclude that Raganuga sadhana, although an advanced platform of spiritual development, is still within the realm of sadhana. It is not bhava or prema. So it is a sadhana. It is something that we are cultivating. Rag anuga means to follow in the footsteps of those who have rag, intense attachment to Krishna. That's Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. We're just practicing. And sometimes you hear devotees speak about Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. They don't understand it properly, and they're mentioning that they're getting confused that it's actually the perfectional stage. It's not perfection. It is the gateway to perfection, the practice that leads us to perfection. That's what Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti is. Freedom from these anartas comes at nishta, steadiness. However, it is true that slight traces of anartas remain until we attain prema. Thus, in an extended sense, it may be said that anatta nivritti is not actually complete until prema. We don't become 100% free of material desires until we reach the platform of prema bhakti, where we attain love of Godhead. The example to substantiate or to prove this point is Bharat Maharaj, who was on the stage of Bhava Bhakti, which is extremely advanced, extremely purified, and he still became attracted to a deer, which shows that there was still some trace of anatta or material attachment, even at that level. So it's important to understand that we can practice Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti even with some material desires, and that will lead us to fully cleansing ourselves of material desires. Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Prabhupada, however, do not use the term in this extended sense. The following explanation may clarify this position. Raganuga Bhakti is discussed in the second wave of Bhakti-rasmrta-sindhu. The second wave deals exclusively with sadhana bhakti, third wave with bhava bhakti, and the fourth wave with prema bhakti. Thus, it is located in the text. Thus, by its location in the text, we can understand that Raganuga Bhakti is an element of sadhana. It is not bhava or prema. So in other words, it's not perfection. It is sadhana which leads to sajja or perfection. The same fact is also clear in the Nectar of Instruction, text 8, in the purport. Prabhupada says, in the transcendental realm of Braja, one should serve the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna with a feeling similar to that of his associates, and one should place himself under the direct guidance of a particular associate of Krishna and should follow in his footsteps. This method is applicable both in the method of sadhana, spiritual practices, executed while in the stage of bondage, and in the stage of sajja, God realization, when one is a siddha purush or a spiritually perfect soul. So the summary is, Raganuga Bhakti is a sadhana. It's a practice which leads us to becoming a pure devotee, following in the footsteps of the residents of Vrindavan. The basic qualification for spontaneous devotional service is lopa, a strong desire to have a relationship with Krishna and to serve him in a specific relationship. This generally manifests only when one is freed from material contamination. So Prabhupada says we must become freed from material contamination. That's why at the time of initiation in ISKCON, we vow to chant 16 rounds a day, which leads us to developing this spontaneous attraction to Krishna. And we vow to follow the 4 regulative principles: no meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication and gambling. Why? Because these anartas or material desires will disqualify us or disallow us to fully develop our mood of spontaneous attraction to Krishna. So now there are 3 texts we mentioned in the beginning. There are 3 texts which describe Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. So now we'll discuss the first one. The 3rd paragraph of page 126, under the subheading of conjugal love, we find the first verse describing Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, which is from Bhakti-rasmrta-sindhu 1-294. Krishnam smaram janam chasya preshtam nija samihitam tatat kata ritashchaso kuriyad vasam braje sada. The devotee should always think of Krishna within himself, and one should choose a very dear devotee who is a servitor of Krishna in Vrindavan. One should constantly engage in topics about that servitor and his loving relationship to Krishna. And one should live in Vrindavan. However, if one cannot physically live in Vrindavan, he should meditate. So the first practice of Raganuga Bhakti is to meditate on the relationship of service between Krishna and his dear devotee. The specific relationship and devotee we meditate upon depends on our devotional aspiration. For example, one who desires to serve with conjugal affection may meditate on the mood and service of a specific gopi or Kishore Krishna. One who desires to serve with parental affection may meditate on the mood of service of Mother Yashoda for Kumara Krishna. So, according to your mood, this will awaken. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj, says that after 15 or 20 years of practicing sadhana bhakti, something should begin to awaken. If we're chanting properly the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, something should begin to awaken. And we should begin to become attracted to a particular rasa in Krishna's service. And we should begin to become attracted to a particular devotee who is in that rasa. So, for example, in conjugal rasa, you begin to meditate on Srimati Radharani or one of the Ashtasakis, for example. In Vatsalya rasa, you begin to meditate on the mood of Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj in their service to Krishna. In Sakya rasa, the cowherd boys like Sri Dhamma, Sudama, Stoka Krishna, Ujjwala, Arjuna, Subal, these different devotees. And we begin to meditate on their mood of service to Krishna. And as we begin to meditate on their mood of service to Krishna, for example, those in conjugal rasa meditating on Krishna as a teenager. Those in Sakya rasa meditating on Krishna as a boy, a cowherd boy. Those in Vatsalya rasa meditating on Krishna as Komara, as a young boy. So this is the meditation that comes. So we need to cultivate that mood of bhakti. And by cultivating that mood of bhakti, that's Raganuga Bhakti, when you begin to meditate on a particular servant and their mood of service to Krishna. A person who aspires to constantly remember Krishna and his eternal devotees is advised to take shelter of Vrindavan. One should physically live there, or if you can't, then you should mentally live there. So Prabhupada mentions, if you can't physically live there, then that's why we visit Vrindavan. We try to visit Vrindavan regularly. Prabhupada said we should go every year. Why do we go there on a regular basis? So that when we're practicing our sadhana here in the West, we can meditate on Vrindavan. So it is very important to visit the Holy Dham regularly. And then, if we can't live there permanently, then we can meditate on the Holy Dham in our devotional service. Prabhupada summarizes these instructions by saying, when one is actually liberated from material contamination, he can always remember an eternal devotee in Vrindavan in order to love Krishna in the same capacity. And developing such an aptitude, one will always live in Vrindavan, even within his mind. Now the second verse, which describes Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. Seva sadhika rupena siddha rupena chatrihi tadbhava lipsuna karya Raja Lokanu Sarataha. The advanced devotee who is inclined to spontaneous loving service should follow the activities of a particular associate of Krishna in Vrindavan. He should execute service externally as a regulative devotee, as well as internally from his self-realized position. Thus, he should perform devotional service both externally and internally. This is an interesting point. In Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, externally, we follow the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates, the six Goswamis, and Lord Chaitanya's associates. We practice sadhana bhakti as Prabhupada externally taught us and showed us. Right? That is the mood that we should all follow. Now, we should follow that mood externally. Externally, we should serve like that. Right? Following the footsteps of the Goswamis, of Prabhupada, our Guru Maharajas, we should externally practice all the items of sadhana that they practice. Chanting our rounds, hearing the Bhagavatam, associating with the devotees, worshipping the deities, and residing in holy places. And internally, we should meditate on Krishna's eternal servants in Sri Vrindavan Dham, or Lord Chaitanya's eternal servants in Sri Mayapur Dham, or both in conjunction. This is the mood of the Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. In Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, internally he is meditating on the eternal associates, and externally he's following their footsteps when they come to this world as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates. The first verse instructed the Raganuga Bhakta to always think about an eternal devotee of Vrindavan. The present verse elaborates on this, instructing how to think of this Vrindavan devotee and absorb oneself in his or her loving service mood. So, Prabhupada writes on page 126, a devotee who is actually advanced in Krishna consciousness, who is constantly engaged in devotional service, should not manifest himself, even though he has attained perfection. The idea is that he should always continue to act as a neophyte devotee as long as his material body is there. Activities in devotional service under regulative principles must be followed even by the pure devotee. Then Prabhupada explains on pages 126 and 127 about the internal mood of following and meditating on Radha Krishna and Gaur Nitai. When he realizes his actual position in relationship with the Lord, he can, along with the discharging of regulative service, think within himself of the Lord, under the guidance of a particular associate of the Lord, and develop his transcendental sentiments in following that associate. Externally, follow the eternal associates of Lord Chaitanya. Internally, follow the mood of the Brij Basis. Srila Prabhupada warns us so-called Siddha Pranali. The process is based on an interpretation of the current shloka of Bhakti-rasmrta-sindhu that is deviant in two ways. So this is important to understand. Prabhupada speaking about those who are Prakrita Sahajiyas. They imagine that they have become associates of the Lord simply by thinking of themselves like that. So sometimes you'll see, you'll go to Vrindavan. I've seen this, that they externally, they dress like gopis. I've seen men in Vrindavan. They dress like gopis. They put rouge on their cheeks and makeup, kajal, on their eyes, lipstick. And they dress in saris, wear bangles, and they try to speak in a high voice. This is not how to follow the residents of Vrindavan. Can't externally take on the dress. No one in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition does this. No, this is not the tradition. The tradition is internally you meditate on that. Externally you follow the Varnashram system nicely. Now verse 3, which describes the practice of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. Excuse me. Shravanot, Kirtanadini, Vaita, Bhakshu, Ditanitu, Yan Gani, Chaitanyatra, Vigeyani, Manishibi. Learned acharyas know that the 64 practices of Vaidhi Bhakti, headed by hearing and chanting, are also useful in Raganuga Bhakti. It's an important point. As we mentioned previously, the 64 items of Bhakti, which we've just studied from chapter 6 to 13, when you practice Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, you still follow those 64 items of Bhakti, because they will awaken love of Godhead. Now, when you become more advanced in Bhakti, you practice those 64, but in a different mood, in the mood of spontaneous loving service to Krishna. So we have to practice like that, in the mood of spontaneous loving service to Krishna. Gradually, that has to manifest within our consciousness. We're still doing all the same types of devotional. We make garlands, as an example. We offer arti, we offer the bhoga, we dress the deities. But the mood changes internally. We meditate on the mood of the residents of Vrindavan while we're doing those services. Srila Prabhupada writes on page 127, learned acharyas recommend that we follow the regulative principles even after the development of spontaneous love for Krishna. One should specifically engage himself in the type of devotional service for which he has a natural aptitude. In this way, everyone should act according to his particular taste. So that is Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. We practice the devotional services that we've always practiced, but our mood changes. The internal mood becomes deep and meditative upon the eternal associates of Krishna. So there are two types of Raganuga Bhakti, Kamanuga and Sambandhanuga. We explained that in the last chapter and also in this chapter. Now, in Kamanuga, there are two divisions. Sambhog, Ichchamayi, striving to serve Krishna, as do those who directly meet with him in conjugal love, and Tadbhava, It's chatmika, striving not to meet with Krishna directly, but to assist the supreme heroine, Srimati Radharani, and thus directly experience her loving mood through service and appreciation. So this is the two types of Kamanuga, Raganuga, Sadhana Bhakti. The first one is that you try to follow in the footsteps of the gopis who directly have physical, intimate, conjugal contact with Krishna. So they directly contact Krishna and please his senses. And then there's the meditation of following the manjaris who do not physically have contact with Krishna and do not satisfy him in that way, but rather they assist Srimati Radharani and the gopis who do have that direct contact with Krishna in their service. So generally, we follow that mood, the second mood. That's generally the mood that we try to cultivate in Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, to follow in the footsteps of the associates, of the manjari, maidservants of Srimati Radharani and the gopis. One gradually becomes eligible for Kamanuga Sadhana Bhakti by developing a natural attraction to serving Krishna in conjugal love. One achieves this mainly by worshipping the deities of Radha, Krishna, and hearing Krishna's pastimes with the gopis. It's a very interesting point. From the very beginning of ISKCON, Prabhupada installed Radha Krishna deities all over the world and gave us the Krishna book in which we hear the pastime of Krishna with the residents of Vrindavan. So from the very beginning of our practice of sadhana bhakti, we're already infused with a certain amount of mood of Raganuga sadhana. Raganuga sadhana is there from the very beginning. It's mixed with our Vaidhi sadhana bhakti from the very beginning of our spiritual life. Prabhupada says on page 128, this development of conjugal love can be possible only with those who are already engaged in following the regulative principles of devotional service, specifically in worship of Radha and Krishna in the temple. Such devotees gradually develop a spontaneous love for the deity, and by hearing of the Lord's exchange of loving affairs with the gopis, they gradually become attracted to their pastimes. So this is what Prabhupada gave us from the very beginning. Prabhupada, the more we study Prabhupada, the more we become amazed that he fully understood the mood of Caitanya Mahaprabhu and Rupa Goswami and the disciplic succession and his Guru Maharaj, of how to spread Krishna consciousness perfectly all over the world. So Prabhupada explains that when you're in a male body, it's not a disqualification. Like, I'm currently in a male body. My jiva, my soul is in a male body. So because I'm in a male body, it is not a disqualification for practicing Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. Because it's not about the body, it's about the internal meditation. So even if we're in a male body in this lifetime, we can meditate internally on the mood of the gopis in their service to Krishna. And vice versa. Those in a female body, for example, could meditate on the mood of the cowherd boys in their service to Krishna. So both are applicable. The body is external, and it does not determine your mood in practicing Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. Now, there are two further clarifications in regards to conjugal love. There are two types of conjugal love towards Krishna, parakya and swakya. Parakya means unwedded love. That is the type of conjugal love that the gopis share with Krishna. They're not married to Krishna. Prabhupada explains in Krishna book, actually they are married, but externally they appear to be unmarried. They're not married to Krishna externally. It appears like that. We have to understand that very carefully. It's a type of conjugal love where you never externally appear to get married to Krishna, but you have an intense desire to be his lover, to be his wife. That is your internal desire. But it does not externally manifest as a marriage. So that is called parakya bhav. Secondly, we have swakya. Swakya means, swa means ownership, on one's own. That Krishna is married, like the queens in Dwarka. They are married to Krishna. That is called swakya bhav or swakya rasa. That they have that mood of, we are married to Krishna. Krishna belongs to us. We belong to Krishna. And that's why parakya bhav is considered to be higher, because there's no guarantee that the gopis, for example, can meet with Krishna in their pastimes. There's no guarantee that they will meet because they're not married. So sometimes there are obstacles in their meeting. They can't be with Krishna 24 hours a day because they have to be separated from him sometimes. They're not married to him. It's not appropriate for them to be with him in public. To associate with him, they have to run to the forest and meet him in secret rendezvous in the forest. So that is the mood of Krishna in Vrindavan. The mood of Krishna in Vrindavan is that he is not married to the gopis. Whereas the queens, they have the guarantee in Swakya that Krishna will return at the end of each day and he will fulfill their desires and they will enjoy conjugal bliss in the married relationship. So it's not as intense and it's not as satisfying to Krishna. And the love that the gopis experience in their relationship with Krishna, nothing surpasses that unwedded love. Now there is also Sambandhanuga. This chapter ends with a summary of Srila Rupa Goswami's instructions on developing spontaneous attachment to Krishna in parental or friendly moods. Like conjugal love, parenthood and friendship have two categories. The first aspires for direct parenthood or friendship with Krishna, and the second aspires for service and appreciation of Krishna's parents and friends. Prabhupada explains on page 129. In the development of becoming either the father or friend of the Lord, there are two varieties. One method is that one may try to become the father of the Lord directly, and the other is that one may follow Nanda Maharaj and cherish the ideal of being Krishna's father. So, Anuga means to follow. You can't become Mother Yashoda and you can't become Nanda Maharaj, but you can become their followers, their assistants, their servants, or you can follow in their mood. But we cannot become those devotees. Rupa Goswami warns of the danger of aspiring for a direct relationship especially in relation to parenthood. When desiring to become Krishna's father, one may inadvertently develop a desire to become Nanda Maharaj himself. This is no less a Mayavadi conception than the desire to become Krishna. If one becomes contaminated by such Mayavad implications, whatever advancement he has made will be obliterated. Rupa Goswami gives an example of Sambandhanuga Sadhana Bhakti. This is page 130 of Nectar of Devotion. In the Skanda Purana, there is a story of an old man residing in Hastinapur, capital of the kingdom of the Pandavas, of the Pandus, who desired Krishna as his beloved son. This old man was instructed by Narada to follow in the footsteps of Nanda Maharaj, and thus he achieved success. On page 130, it also says, Rupa Goswami closes the discussion on Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti by mentioning that some people, the Vallabha Sampradaya, use the term Pushti Marg to indicate Raganuga sadhana. Srila Prabhupada writes, this process of devotional service is sometimes called Pushti Marg. So there are other Sampradayas like the Vallabha Sampradaya, the Nimbaka Sampradaya. There are other Sampradayas who also practice Raganuga sadhana bhakti. But we are Gaudiya Vaishnavas, so we follow in the mood and follow in the footsteps of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami and the other Goswamis of Vrindavan. So I'll stop there for tonight. Does anyone have any questions or comments on anything we discussed? Okay. Thank you all for coming. Next week, we will study chapter 17 and begin to discuss Bhava Bhakti. So we'll see you next week. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.